Hey there! Welcome to Product Marketing Maestros, Tales from the Front Lines. I'm your host, Nitin Karthik. As Director of Product Marketing, I've always found that real world case studies are the litmus test for the effectiveness of any product marketing strategy. And that is why, in this show, we dive into the minds of industry titans as well as rising stars, unpacking their expertise in action packed 15-minute episodes, showcasing the power of product marketing through real world case studies. And today, we are joined by none other than the product marketing maestro, Mark Assini, who is Senior Product Marketing Manager of FinTech at Jobber. Mark is a top 100 product marketing influencer and host of the Runaway Success podcast, Product Marketing Life. You may have heard of that. With over 9 years across product marketing and general marketing, sales, and others, Mark has helped bring technology products and services to market and be the voice of the customer and wear many more hats along the way. With a background in video games, branding, advertising, and even at a creative agency, he supports a two-sided marketplace. Mark also has a unique appreciation for the challenges associated with working in both technical and creative environments, balancing analysis and processes with what we can call creative chaos. And with that, Mark, it is an absolute honor to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thanks, Nick. Super excited to be here and chatting with you today.
All right. So, Mark, without further ado, let's do as we promised our audience, which is give them some actionable insights. And for this, we're going to use, of course, a real world case study from your vast experience. We'll use the STAR framework. So, we're going to talk about the situation, the targets, the actions, and the results. So, with that, Mark, pick a situation from your experience and tell us a little bit about that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do it. So, let's turn the clock back quite a bit. My first product marketing role after completing my MBA, first time ever really understanding what it is to be a product marketer. And I was at a video game studio. I know a lot of people out there, have either active or passive interest in the video game industry. And it was an industry that I really wanted to, get my feet into and explore for the first time. And in this role, I was assigned to the studio's most successful game. It's a social game. Existed exclusively on Facebook. This was back when kind of social gaming on Facebook was arguably on the kind of the plateau or on the decline in terms of popularity. A lot of players had shifted to mobile, but we at the studio had a runaway success that continued to support the players and the studio for close to a decade at the time that I had joined. So in my first, as I said, kind of foray into product marketing, one of the early projects that I was assigned was doing a pricing kind of breakdown of the current offering of the in-app purchases in the game as they existed. So really taking a look at, what are the different price points we have on offer in exchange for that purchase? What are we offering in terms of in-game content, in-game currency, which is effectively how you bought things in the game itself, and just ensuring that we were, making the right choices from a pricing perspective and offering the right value at the right price point.
Wow. Yeah, I think it's interesting. A lot of people, Mark, join product marketing from various different backgrounds, and video gaming. I'm sure there are a lot of people in the audience. Wonderful. So you've told us about the situation. Tell us a little bit about the targets, either qualitative or quantitative. How should we think about the targets you were up against, Mark?
Yeah. So the targets themselves were a bit of both qualitative and quantitative. From a quantitative perspective, we were observing some pretty interesting behavior amongst our customer base. It looked like their purchases were isolated to a specific price point. So we offered packages across $1, $5, $10, sometimes as high as $100 to $150. And what we were noticing is that the purchases tended to really converge around the lower price point. And you would imagine, obviously, cheaper, more affordable. But we knew there was something else going on because there were some customers who were willing to shell out for the big purchases, but not as many as we had assumed or really had expected based on our past analyses. So we really wanted to, from a quantitative perspective, kind of spread out that purchase behavior while still, kind of maintaining our existing pace in terms of revenue and ideally grow that revenue. From a qualitative perspective, and this is something in hindsight I wish we had paid more attention to, and I'll explain why in a little bit here, but also managing the customer and player fan base. So, being a social game, and as I said, having been around for close to a decade at that point, we had some really, really dedicated fans who were very protective of their game. In fact, the studio that I worked at, we had actually initially sold the game to another studio and then purchased it back after the studio that had owned it at the time threatened to shut down the game altogether. So our fans were really passionate, really big fans of us as a studio, but even more importantly, big fans of the games. So any changes that we made, whether it was to the in-game experience or, as you would expect, pricing, was responded to pretty with high enthusiasm, let's call it. So we really wanted to make sure that any changes we made to pricing were digestible by our customer base. Let's call it that.
Yeah, and pricing, Mark, is such a double-edged sword. It's almost like a trade-off, right? We want to optimize it, not necessarily maximize, for one or the other. Like giving away the store, you don't want that, but you also want to not run a charity. You need a profitable business. So that's wonderful. I think a lot of our audience can really relate to that. Wonderful. So we've talked about the situation and the targets. Now, Mark, let's get into the meat and potatoes. Let's talk about the actions that you undertook for this project.
Yeah, happy to dive in there. So it's interesting, when you talk about pricing in the gaming space, and again, pricing more broadly, when you're dealing with digital goods, whether they be subscriptions or things that you can't put your hands on, obviously the perceived value is going to be fairly subjective from customer to customer. And really understanding the willingness to pay is an important aspect of understanding what that value is relative to the price point someone is, as I said, willing to pay for. In this particular case, it was interesting because after doing some pretty thorough analysis, what we found, the primary reason why our customers were, as I said earlier, gravitating towards those lower price points was because in actuality, we were giving away way more value in terms of that premium currency and content at the lower price points than we were at the higher price points. So, I mean, anybody who's worked in the social or mobile game space knows that the dollar price point, the dollar deals, as we call them, tend to be pretty popular, right? They're the lowest barrier or point of entry from a kind of premium experience perspective, most affordable. And typically when you kind of scale your pricing, as your price point increases, the amount of value you're giving away and the discounting becomes stronger because you want to incentivize someone to go from, that initial $1 purchase to seeing, oh, actually, if I spend $4 more, I can get 25% more value than I would if I had just bought five $1 packages. And then so on and so forth as you go up to, as I said, 25, 50, 75, 100. So in looking at kind of past deals, what I had found was that we were actually giving away more of that premium currency per dollar at the dollar price point than we were at our most expensive tier. So we were actually disincentivizing our players from buying at higher price points because they were truly getting less value for their dollar, which, I mean, obviously in hindsight and in chatting with other product marketers seems crazy. But, the team at the studio at the time, because they didn't have a strong product marketer, just didn't think at that level of criticality as a product marketer would. They were making decisions based on what their customers responded positively to. And obviously a customer is going to love getting more for less, right? So in doing that analysis and kind of understanding what price points and how much we should be offering to kind of optimize for both parties, the customer or the player and the studio, I put forward this recommendation of saying, hey, we really need to kind of rebalance scales here. And really, when we do a dollar deal, we want to give away good value, but we want it to feel like a special event. They shouldn't be happening all the time. And that was something that the studio kind of leaned on a little bit too heavily to keep revenue steady and predictable, was to offer these dollar deals at a regular cadence. So we decided in the analysis, hey, we're going to continue to do these, but we're going to change the kind of mix of the packaging around that. And we're going to push more of the value to those highest price points to encourage, those purchases at those points. So yeah, that was the kind of analysis. It was very quantitative in approach. And yeah, I guess we'll dive into the results in a little bit.
Yeah. Wow. I think this is an important lesson for a lot of our audience, which is sometimes when we get actionable insights, we have to do a lot of dumpster diving. We have to go into the numbers. In your case, it was pricing. In someone else's case, it may be something else, competitive analysis, what have you. And ultimately, from that deep analysis is where we get the insight. So wonderful. I think you have laid it out very nicely, Mark. Now let's talk about the results. You alluded to that. So please give us our audience a little glimpse into the results that you were able to achieve here.
Yeah, happy to share. So I would love to be able to stand here and say, it was a runaway success right out of the gate. Customers loved it. Revenue was through the roof. But the initial reception was, as you expect, pretty frosty from our player base. They were smart players. They were aware, picked on pretty quickly what we were doing. We had, as I said, a very engaged player base, and we had a very active forum. And players were pretty upset, as you would expect. As I said, in hindsight, one of the kind of key takeaways for me was I had focused as a product marketer so heavily on the quant and understanding what it was, or the outcomes were going to be for the business and how to do things right for the business. But I had forgotten, again, just being a novice product marketer at the time, what the impact to the customer, again, and in this case, the player was going to be and how they might respond. Oftentimes, especially I think in the B2B SaaS world, we make these pricing changes with a lot of analysis and thought. But sometimes we, again, index a little bit too heavily on the impact of the business and not enough on the impact of the customer. So, yeah, at that time, it was an interesting one. I truly felt for our customer support team because they bore the brunt of the negative customer feedback, as you would expect. But over time, things did die down and things did level out, and players did kind of adopt to this new purchasing behavior that we had hoped for. Some players were obviously pretty upset, and some of them did ultimately churn. Natural of any really kind of interactive experience or any product when pricing is changed, but it was manageable. Churn was manageable. We weren't panicking. And as I said, yeah, those purchasing behaviors eventually changed over time, and players truly did get excited about dollar deals when they arrived. Some players would save and wait for those deals and make those purchases at that time. Others were a little bit more impatient, and they were willing to pay a little bit more to get that premium currency and that content sooner rather than later at those higher price points. So from a quantitative perspective, we were able to, again, steady out the revenue and get it to be a bit more predictable. So we could confidently say, hey, we're going to put this offer in market, and we expect this in terms of revenue lift. And we would actually map out and plan in a month and a quarter at a time when we would trigger those deals. It gave us a little bit more flexibility to do ad hoc deals when we saw revenue was below expectations. So we just got a better control over what the revenue would look like on a day-to-day and month-to-month basis. So yeah, again, some short-term pain for long-term gain. But at the end of the day, we got a lot as a studio, got a lot smarter about how we priced and packaged our in-game offerings, and we were able to carry a lot of those learnings forward and maintain overall player satisfaction and engagement.
I love that. I love that, Mark. In fact, I applaud you for sharing not just what worked well, but also some of the pitfalls, right? Because I think it is very often that we as product marketers, we like to celebrate success. And of course, success should be celebrated, but we should also recognize where we can improve. And I think your story is a tale which will inform our audience of some of the pitfalls when you deal with pricing. You've got to be very, very careful. So thank you. I think our audience really appreciated that. And I learned a lot. So this was fabulous, Mark. So Mark, please tell us where can people find you? And I'm sure that if people don't already know about your podcast, you've been sitting under some kind of a rock if you don't know about Mark Assini's podcast. So please tell us about your podcast. Tell us where people can find you, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nathan, for that plug. So, I've been hosting the Product Marketing Life podcast for coming up, I want to say 2 or 3 years now. Episode 100 is fast approaching, so it's an exciting milestone to be able to share with everybody. And then, yeah, outside of that, you can find me on LinkedIn, Mark Assini. There's not very many of us. I think it might be one of two on LinkedIn, so pretty easy to find. And then you're very active in the PMA community on Slack. So if you've ever got any questions about anything product marketing related, if you're interested in being on the show, as mentioned in my introduction, I'm currently in the fintech space. If you ever want to talk anything fintech, you can find me both on LinkedIn and in the PMA Slack community.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Mark. And to the audience, if you aren't already connected or following Mark, please do. I'm a big fan of his podcast myself, so I usually listen. So, Mark, I'm always listening to the next episode. So thank you for that. And my friends, I hope you learned as much as I did from our conversation with Mark Assini. Armed with that knowledge, my friends, onward and upward.